Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It's May 17th today, Friday, and I'm just doing a little update on a few things. I'm going to talk a little bit about Mars's entrance into the sign of Cancer. I'll be doing a separate video of planets in profile on Mars and Cancer as well, but it's a big one and it's worth talking about a little bit. I've gotten a lot of questions today about Mars and Cancer, especially given some of the headlines and news. So I figured I'd just do a little video update about it to kind of try to answer all those questions at once. I appreciate it. There's been some really good questions. But before I do that, I want to make a few announcements. First of all, this Sunday at noon Eastern time, I am hosting a world-renowned scholar named Michael Ward, Dr. Michael Ward. He is a scholar at Oxford, and he wrote a book called Planet Narnia. I don't know if any of you have ever read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or Prince Caspian, or The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, but those Narnia Chronicles are a classic children's fantasy series and are just beloved by many people. Of course, they were written by C.S. Lewis, who was a famous Christian theologian, apologist, and C.S. Lewis had an incredible imagination. He wrote science fiction, he wrote fantasy. He was a contemporary of Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings. And what Michael Ward discovered in this book that he wrote called Planet Narnia, The Seven Heavens in the Imagination of C.S. Lewis, was pretty startling, not only to the academic community at Oxford, the people who spend a lot of time studying C.S. Lewis and his life and his work, but also the Christian community at large, because C.S. Lewis is something of an icon in the Christian community, because he did so much to write about Christian life and the values of the teachings of Jesus. He wrote a book that is unforgettable called Mere Christianity. It's a very sort of rarefied, simplified version of what it means to be a Christian. I grew up in the Christian church, so I had a lot of C.S. Lewis growing up. Regardless of if you are a Christian or not, though, C.S. Lewis just had a way of capturing these timeless spiritual themes and embedding them into these children's stories. And so for that reason, he's beloved by people, whether they're really Christians or not. In the same way that, if you read Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, there's so many timeless spiritual themes that they're not necessarily overtly linked to religion, but more implicitly linked to these kind of timeless spiritual struggles and lessons and things like that. So they were contemporaries with one another. And when Michael Ward was studying the life of C.S. Lewis, he basically came to this realization that, people had always said the Narnia Chronicles seem allegorical. Like if you've ever read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Aslan is kind of like a Jesus figure. He's crucified on a stone table. He rises from the dead, etc. But the rest of the books in the series are not as easy to, it's not as easy to identify a clear allegory. And yet it seems as though they're all allegorical. Tolkien once kind of suggested that they were a mishmash, a hodgepodge, that there was no central theme running through them, that they were just kind of a mishmash of different legendary mythical beasts and creatures and legendary mythical figures and so forth. Michael Ward set out basically as a scholar of Lewis and of the Narnia Chronicles to see if there was some deeper allegorical meaning tied into each of the seven books in the series. And what he discovered and wrote about and is quite famous for in this book, Planet Narnia, is the discovery that each of the seven chronicles of Narnia seems to have been based on one of the seven traditional planets of astrology and the spiritual meaning of those planets, which he turned into different kinds of Christ-centered allegories. Now, in order to do that, first of all, you have to be pretty brilliant. And Ward does an excellent job of conveying not only how brilliant Lewis was, but how secretive he might have been in doing this. And also just the overwhelming amount of evidence within the books themselves that he was actually thinking of each of the planets in all of the seven books. Now, when I first heard about this, I thought, well, this must be like just some kind of conspiracy theory, like an ancient aliens show or something. Which I think are interesting, but probably no one's taking it seriously in the Christian community or in the academic world or whatever. But then I found out he's actually a professor at Oxford, and he's been taken very seriously. There was actually a BBC documentary that was made called The Narnia Code. For me, this was huge because, of course, growing up as a boy, I loved the Narnia Chronicles. In church, they were a way of getting out of the, I don't know, the heaviness of scripture and into the imagination of spirituality. And it turns out that, isn't it interesting, as a little boy, I'm literally loving the Narnia Chronicles, and yet they're filled with planetary symbolism. Even if you haven't read all of the Narnia Chronicles, even if you're not of a Christian background, but if you've ever been exposed to the Narnia Chronicles, to Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, to the books, and you also like astrology, this presentation that Michael Ward is doing for us on Sunday afternoon online through my Spring Speaker Series program is just going to blow your mind. His book really changed my life. It made me realize what an esoteric, beautiful, eccentric, and interesting thinker C.S. Lewis was. It gave me hope for bridges to be built between sort of esoteric Christian mysticism and astrology, which I think is something that really needs to be done. And it also just re-inspired within me an interest in the childhood series, which I ended up reading to my daughter while she was in the womb. I would, every night I read, like literally would like sit right next to my wife's stomach and read. I read all of the Narnia Chronicles to my child while she was, my little girl, while she was in the womb. So I think that you guys are really going to like this. It's at noon Eastern time on Sunday. It's free. You can come and check it out. Should be a couple hours long. We collect donations during the talk. They're optional. We always ask if you have some money that you could donate. It's going to be a 15 to 25 suggested donation, but if you could do 5 or 10, that's always okay. So please come and check this out. I really want to support this, and I want to get a good showing because I also want to show a very well-respected scholar in the academic and Christian world that astrologers are out there, that we take this kind of work seriously, that we're critical thinkers, that we are spiritually focused and serious. And I think that there would be nothing better than to have a good audience show up and say, hey, we're really interested in what you're doing, and in seeing these kinds of connections being made. So again, I would recommend reading the book. I'd recommend checking out the documentary, which you can pick up on Amazon. It's called The Narnia Code. Yeah, come out Sunday to hear Michael Ward give a talk. I'm going to show you how you can do that now. I'm going to put my website up on the screen so that you can see it. So if you go to nightlightastrology.com, night, N-I-G-H-T, L-I-G-H-T, nightlightastrology.com, and you visit the upcoming events page, you scroll down, you're going to see that Michael Ward is visiting with us on Sunday, noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time, United States. And you'll see everything that you need to know about donating in advance if you'd like to. If you want to receive the audio or video because you can't make it live, we can do that. The actual link to join the Zoom meeting is there. You just press that at noon Eastern and you'll pop into our meeting. So I hope that some of you will be able to join us. I'm really looking forward to this. And again, I'm hoping I'm rallying for people to come out and support this, because it's also not exactly orthodox for someone who is a Christian professor who mostly teaches and works within the Christian and academic world to come and speak for a group of astrologers. So I'm really trying to have us represent well. So thank you. All right. Now, there's a couple of other things I want to say before we talk about Mars and Cancer. The other one is that up until May 31st, you can still register and receive the early bird rate for my one-year program in Hellenistic astrology. The program starts on June 9th. We meet on Sundays from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern. There's 30 classes in the year plus 12 guest speakers. It is a really deep immersion into ancient astrology. It gives you a very grounded, guided experience with astrology. It gives you all of the fundamental philosophy, history, and practical methods and techniques that you'll need to start reading charts if that's your intention. Or for a lot of people, it just becomes a very deep, healing and personally transformative experience. And a lot of times when people feel the call to study astrology, that call is it's there for a reason, and it has a will and a way of its own. And I always tell people, you know, if you're feeling like I really want to take this course, I really want to study astrology in depth, even if just for a year of my life, it will benefit you for the rest of your life, because it's like you can't unlearn a language, you know, once you learn it, like astrology. It'll give you a lens and a way of understanding your life and the world around you, you know, for as long as you live. You won't be able to see the world in the same way. So if astrology is something that calls to you, consider diving in a little deeper. It's a great community. It's a great group. I've been posting some videos lately with interviews with former students. If you have any questions you want to ask me about the curriculum or the experience, nightlightastrology@gmail.com. And like I said, there's an early bird rate of $12.99 if you pay in full, all the way up until the end of this month. And then there's a full tuition is $1,800 with a 12-month payment plan. I also do offer hardship tuition for people who need help, and you can email me about that as well. It's nightlightastrology@gmail.com. So that's what I've got to say about that. The last announcement is that my reading rates are going to be going up a little bit over the summer. This is the first time I have slightly raised my rates in over 5 years. But I feel that it's time, due to the sheer volume of readings that I'm receiving now, and the amount of time and energy that I'm putting into it, and the fact that my quality of my readings have gotten a lot better over time. So I am making a slight increase in readings, which means all the prices that you see on my readings page right now are temporary. They're only going to be there for the next month, maybe 2, as my new website is getting finished. I'm also booking out into early July right now. All of the rest of May, all of June is full. Eclipse season is in July. You know, a lot of people really go through some powerful changes during eclipse season. So I always tell people, like, you know, think in advance. Now that I'm booking out a lot farther than I have before, which is a blessing. I'm thankful for the work. But because of that, I'm always telling people, like, book now if you're thinking in advance about eclipse season this July, even into this August, because July will start filling up very quickly as well now. So that, and you know, if you're thinking like, what's a good reading for me if I'm starting from scratch, if you've never had a reading with me before, I recommend the basic or comprehensive birth chart reading, which are 60 or 90 minutes, and it's 150 or 250. And everything is explained here. You can check out the other readings I offer as well. But if you're a first-time client, that's where I have you start. Even if you've had a reading before, I need to get to know your chart for the first time, and that's why I require a basic or comprehensive. The nice thing about comprehensive is that I'll get to know your chart for the first time. We'll talk about it, get some context, and we'll still have time to do a lot of good forecasting for you. If you're a first-time client, with the basic reading, we go through your chart. We have a little bit of time at the end to go through forecasting, but the basic birth chart reading is the first reading where I really need to get to know you before I can say a lot of things about the future. Before I do a lot of accurate forecasting, I need to get the context of the natal karma down, so to speak. So those are the announcements that I have for you. Let's talk a little bit about Mars in Cancer. So first of all, I said this earlier today, but the easiest or simplest way to think about a planet moving through any sign is that the planet has its own natural significations, which represent its needs, demands, or desires. So for Mars, those needs, demands, or desires, the god of war here, the lesser malefic, we're thinking about things like strife, discord, severing, separating, violence, action, hostility, desire. You're thinking about accidents or injuries. You're thinking about conflict and aggression, but you're also thinking about bravery, courage, protectiveness or defensiveness, being knightly, taking risks. So there's a variety. Mars will ask for those things no matter what all the time. And in different charts, different conditions of Mars will tell us what kinds of demands Mars is making. And some of those demands are thought to be subjectively more positive and subjectively more negative or difficult. I know that we all want to start from a level playing field and say, well, Mars isn't good or bad. Mars is just always about all of these different things, but that's actually not true. Astrology is meant to tell us something about the world that we live in, which is a world of duality, and it's not an equal playing field. So, for example, even though from a spiritual perspective, I might have I could reflect positively on the meaning of a tornado. I talked about this today in a post I was exchanging with someone. I could reflect positively on the meaning or value of a tornado, but subjectively speaking, I'm not going to see the tornado from the standpoint of equality. I'm going to see the tornado as bad, right? If it's coming towards me in my house, bad tornado, you know? Um, with reflection, with distance, with some spiritual training, maybe I'm able to maintain equanimity in the face of a tornado, very quietly walk to my basement, very quietly walk away if my house is totaled, and, you know, have equanimity. Yes. So from a certain standpoint, nothing is good or bad. Spiritually speaking, we're learning how to tolerate and see everything with an equal eye, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. But that doesn't change the fact that in this material world, there are largely agreed upon areas of subjective good and bad. So even though we want Mars to be about bravery as much as it is about strife or anger or aggression, the truth of the matter is that Mars will ask, need, or demand for different things, different kinds of things, and act better or worse depending on its environment and its condition. Right? Just like the wind could be nice or it could be a tornado, but it's still wind. So Mars, the study of essential dignities in astrology, is telling us specifically what kind of Mars we're dealing with. So when Mars is in Cancer, what we're dealing with is a Mars that is making all of its demands, and it's making those demands to the moon, because Mars in Cancer is in the sign of the moon. It's in the house of the moon. It's a house guest in the moon's place. So when the moon has to meet the needs of Mars, it's like it's giving it the material, it's feeding Mars the needs, it's feeding Mars the content that it has to meet its needs. So that's why, just as Mars ingresses into Cancer, for example, this is why we say that Mars is in its fall in Cancer, because it's when Mars is served up lunar things, it's rough. We don't love those kinds of things. Generally speaking, it's a bit more like a tornado than, you know, a cool breeze. When Mars gets its needs met through lunar things, we may, on the positive side, have advocacy or protection of those that are innocent, frail, or vulnerable, right? We may have a mother bear protectiveness or something like that, where there's kind of advocating, standing up for, fighting for things related to women, the vulnerable, the environment, children, domestic things, the land, etc. So that's there. I'm not saying it's not. But think of how controversial, for example, the abortion bans are that just came through. This is complicated territory. We have, on the one hand, a group of people who believe very firmly. I know this because I have people in my family that are like this, and I don't necessarily share the same views, but I respect where they're coming from. And I don't like personally just like to stay away from these kinds of debates because they just make people really angry at each other. And my career is not as an activist, so I'm not so engaged in these kinds of like in the policy making or whatever. And it's not where I like to spend my time. But think about it. There's a group of people who is trying to actively advocate and defend for the life of a vulnerable child that has not yet been born. That's where they're coming from. That's Mars in Cancer. On the other hand, the women who feel that they're having their rights taken away from them are women who are having their bodies in some ways dictated, right? They're having their bodily needs or their choice or their agency taken away, right? So you see how both are Mars, god of war, in the sign of the moon, the mother. It doesn't matter. I'm not here today to say which is good or which is bad. Just to illustrate archetypally, that's where that's coming from. That's where we see it in the astrology. Because of the other case, someone would say, well, once a child is born, where is your advocacy and protection? A lot of the times people who are very conservative want to fight for the dignity of the child, don't care about the dignity of the child once it's born. That's a counter argument. You know, you could go on the other hand and say a woman's choice often reflects just the desire to be irresponsible. That's something, you know, you can hear these, you've heard these debates a million times. So all of that has to do with war over battle and war over things like women, children, the vulnerable, etc. Right? Similarly, there was headlines today talking about a WWE wrestler who is a mother who suddenly died. Warrior, Mars, mother, death, strife, conflict. a supermarket chain headline about supermarket or grocery store wars. It was on the headline of CNN today. A lunch lady who got fired for giving a child a lunch even though they didn't have money. These are the things that were on the headlines right as Mars ingresses into Cancer. You can always look when the planet first enters and see. So that's the energy or the mood of Mars in Cancer. What I said today to people in general was, just be careful of that kind of emotional volatility. I always have people that come out of the woodworks wanting to defend Mars in Cancer, which to me is the ultimate, like, kind of sweet irony. People are always misunderstanding, like, oh, you're going after Mars in Cancer. Like, no, I'm not. You're actually illustrating my point, which is that Mars in Cancer is very protective emotionally, especially over that which they feel is more vulnerable. So people will say, well, I have Mars in Cancer in my chart, and I'm not a bad person. I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm whatever. It's like, yeah, there it is. That's Mars in Cancer, right? That's Mars in Cancer. You have to be careful, though, of taking things too personally. Mars in Cancer can do that, of being really emotionally needy or aggressive or demanding. That's a Mars in Cancer possibility. But so too is like competitive swimming. Someone mentioned today, I think Michael Phelps has Mars in Cancer. So people were asking me, like, is this like, does the system of ancient dignities sort of, are they getting down on the feminine? I was like, no, not at all. If anything, all they're talking about is the complicated relationship between the masculine and the feminine. You've got super aggressive god of war, Mars. And these are the kinds of conflicts, the kind of archetypal, eternal dynamics that come up. So, for example, when a baby is born, there's a cutting that takes place. There's an umbilical cord that's cut. There's a severing that takes place. That's Mars in Cancer. You know what I mean? There's so many different things that fit it. It's archetypal. It's not ultimately negative. It's not ultimately positive. It's not about, it's not really about violence towards women or, it has so many valences. It's really important not to make the mistake of, with this one archetype compared to many others, people tend to have very strong emotional reactions. So I just always tell people, like, keep an even mind. If you have Mars in Cancer in your own chart, doesn't mean that you're some kind of terrible tyrant or, we're not talking about some kind of psychotic feminine archetype. It doesn't have to be anything like that. But we are talking about the god of war, and the god of war getting its needs met by Mars. And that can be a really challenging fit. You know what I mean? That's but it's natural. It's not unnatural either. It's a part of, just like the cutting of the umbilical cord is natural. And just like mama bears will protect their cubs fiercely, just like there are constantly, since I've been a human being on this planet, the same debates happening about whether or not, what defines or constitutes protecting a child or protecting a mother, right? So those are the Mars and Cancer things that are coming up. So hopefully that gives you guys some things to think about and gives you a way of conceptualizing how and why dignity works in the way that it does. I hope that I will see some of you on Sunday at the Michael Ward talk. It really helps to have the planetary archetypes put into the framework of other stories. When you see a planet alive as the central literary theme in a book or a movie or something like that, you get to know the planet. You develop your relationship with the planet on a much deeper level. So I really encourage everyone to come out and check this out. Even if you haven't read the Narnia Chronicles, it will inspire you to read them, especially if you have kids or if you're someone who likes fantasy books or something like that. You're never too old to read these books. They're fantastic. And now you'll have a new reason to want to read them as well. So, and I also hope to see some of you in class and maybe do a reading for some of you in Eclipse season coming up. Okay, that's what I've got. Take care, everyone. Bye.